Hey everyone, welcome to the landscape here at Strawbery Banke Museum. I'm in the Victory Garden today, one of my favorite gardens here in the landscape. This garden, along with their house perpendicular to the garden, was owned by the Pecunies family in the early 1940s. Now, Victory Gardens go all the way back to World War I. Throughout wartime efforts, this campaign nationally to really inspire the public across the country to cultivate their own resources within their own neighborhoods and local economies, as most of our surpluses coming out of the farms was going to wartime efforts to support troops and allied nations. Now, this was a time of resiliency and a revival of subsistence, really relying on your own landscape. Many people during the 1940s and earlier on were even tearing up their lawns and turf, planting more and more local resources, giving families and neighborhoods more opportunities for those resources, as our corner stores, our markets were very limited. This was the time of rationing, so you couldn't really order as much sugar or flour or other resources as possible, so really relying more often than not on your own landscape, your own neighborhoods, what they can produce locally. Now, during the time of Victory Gardens, there were many resources cultivated within the landscape, many heirlooms and plants that were cultivated that people were relying on through this age of resilience, this wartime effort to really cultivate locally. Now, what were they relying on? Well, they had tomatoes, they had beans, certainly those resources that were easily cultivated very quickly, and those succession plantings of maybe beets and lettuces. We're going to go take a look at a few of these specimens currently being cultivated within the landscape, and you'll get a really good idea of kind of these reflections of heirlooms that people were relying on here in Portsmouth during the 40s as they were cultivating their own Victory Gardens. Let's go take a look. Here's a few rows of lettuce. This in particular is called Forellenschluss, and that's loosely translated to speckled trout or spotted trout lettuce. It's very easily cultivated. You can direct sow or transplant your lettuces. Direct sow saved quite a lot of time, and that allowed you to sow multiple times per year, so you can have succession planting. So planting at different times to have different crops at different times of the season. So very essential method during the early 40s, not only planting once, but planting several times of the same crop, so you ate throughout the season as much as possible. Here's a closer look at Forellenschluss, or painted trout lettuce, and you can actually see that mottling, that speckling on the leaves that actually increases as the plant ages, and it kind of looks like a speckled trout. Here's the beet row, and I believe this is Detroit dark red. So one very common heirloom at the time during the 40s. Now, these greens are very, very delicious at this point, certainly, but we can wait till they get a little bit larger. But of course, we're waiting for that root system. As you can see between the beets, we have some onion sets. So during the Victory Garden age, and certainly today as well, the practice of really enhancing every area of your landscape was essential. Especially during wartime efforts of the 40s, people wanted to maximize, their areas, so they produced as much as possible. So even between small rows like this, you could also get more food as opposed to just planting and spacing things out. Here's some nice garlic, which was essential amongst other types of bulbs and storage roots, especially going into the winter months. So very significant throughout early American history, certainly in those Victory Gardens in the early 40s. And again, bulbs like this, similar to potatoes and parsnips and turnips, that you could store for long periods of time in your kitchens, your cupboards, or your root cellars. Anyone know what that is? It is a yucca. Awesome plant, really ornamentally grown during the 1940s, but nowadays we eat the edible taproot. Absolutely delicious and a nice substitute for potato. Big old rhubarb here, absolutely delicious this time of year. I love it. Lots of shoots underneath, coloring up nicely. Now, this is Marshall strawberry, one of the first heirlooms that were available to the American public early on as more and more breeders were cultivating beyond those native species, Fragaria virginiana, Fragaria vesca, those natives. And cultivating beyond those wild species, many breeders came up with marketable species. Let's actually take a closer look at these very pretty little flowers. The bees are actually buzzing all over the place today, so we'll see fruit set shortly as anthesis, or the flowering process, continues. Here we go. Found a little bit of fruit set on the edge of the strawberry planting. There's a nice green one. So we'll see those coloring up nicely in a few weeks. Very excited. Well, I hope you enjoyed the program today. I'm Erik Wochholz, and this is Strawbery Banke.